live. We're going to start the talk right now. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to do this. This is a first for me. First for a number in a number of ways. This is I've written a fair number of books in my life, a few dozen, but this is the first book that is for a popular audience, for people who don't have, who are not acquainted with the field, who are not biblicists or aspiring biblicists or people who are taking college courses and such. This is for a popular audience, and I'm really excited to talk about it and where it came from. So it's a just a great pleasure to do so, and definitely within the context of of people who I respect and admire, and just an audience that comes with open minds, and just it's just a pleasure to do it in this context. I'm really happy that I have a receptive audience. 10 years ago, when I wasn't a congregational rabbi, I wouldn't have been able to have this kind of talk, and it's a real pleasure to do it. So just hot off the press, my book just is now the #1 new release in Christian Old Testament criticism. So I know that's a very niche category on Amazon, but I'm really excited. I'm going to share the screen for a moment and show it to you, just to show how excited I am about it. I expected it to do well on its first day, especially when you're giving a book talk, but I didn't expect it to get to a #1 new release in anything. So this is very exciting for me. So I just want to revel in that a little. Okay, because I've written lots of books, and I'm very happy when I break even on the cost that took to generate books, and I have higher hopes for this one. Okay, so without further ado, let me start with this talk. We labeled this talk as the humanism of the first version of the Bible. Now, that is a bit of a misnomer, meaning humanism, as people who know some philosophy know, is actually a well thought out philosophical movement. It's not well defined. There are various people who see themselves as humanist philosophers, but it's not as like a movement of like existentialism and such. So I don't mean that. That's not what I mean. I'm not talking about it from the philosophical perspective of humanism, the modern philosophical value-based movement of people to which lots of us here belong. I'm talking about something else. And what is it that I'm talking about? I'm talking about the fact that if you read the Hebrew Bible, if you just open up from page 1 and start reading, you'll see that the main character of biblical narrative, and also of the other sections, biblical story, and of other sections, is God, and God appears more than any other character, and is very well developed. Many of the biblical authors wrote about God, and so that's the perception, that any correct perception that anybody who opens the Hebrew Bible gets, that it's a book about God. But I believe that more than believe, I tried to prove, first in my dissertation, and now more in a more popular way in this book, that the first version of the Hebrew Bible is the main characters of it are human beings, and not divinities. And so it's a really that type of humanism, human-centric, that I'm talking about. So kind of it was a bit of a misnomer to catch your interest, that title. So forgive me. I wanted to clarify that that I wasn't trying to mislead you. There was no humanism in the biblical period. That was not a philosophical movement that existed then, so that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's go on. Now that I've clarified that, and I've asked for your forgiveness. In a sense, every book is an autobiography, in some sense, because you write it, you bring yourself into it. So for me, this book, more than any other book I've written, is in a sense an autobiography. Because atypically to secular humanists, I have always been interested in the Hebrew Bible. Meaning, what do I mean by always? Ever since I could read. Meaning, my interest developed from about age 7 at Sunday school. And that's when I corrected my Sunday school teacher. She said that the animals went into the ark 2 by 2, and I told her no, that's not true. There's one version that says 2 by 2 and another version that says 7 by 7. Now, my Sunday school was not happy. A Sunday school teacher was not happy to be corrected by a 7-year-old, and I admit that I was, as they say, chutzpahdik then. I hope I'm a lot less chutzpahdik now, but I just was very interested in the contradictions and versions and questions that arose from this ancient text from a very early age. And that interest hasn't really flagged. I've become interested in other things, of course. But for the past 35, 36 years, I've been consistently interested in Hebrew Bible. And my interest has expanded to New Testament. My main focus in my second doctorate was on New Testament. I've become very interested in the Quran, and I apply the same kinds of ways of thinking that I did while looking at the Hebrew Bible to those ancient texts as well. So a common thread ever since I've been 7 was that I was never governed by the assumption that we're talking about a text written by God, or a text that has the power that has that kind of authority. I took it from age 7. I remember this about myself from age 7. I just really thought the stories in the Hebrew Bible were just really interesting. So an interesting book of world literature, and that's how I looked at the Bible. And that probably is thanks to my parents' upbringing a little. My parents are professors still. By this time, almost professors emeritus. And they just, they taught me. I got critical thinking of that nature in my mother's milk. And so I was just, and I've looked at the Hebrew Bible very, in that way ever since I was about 7. I didn't study biblical criticism until I was in college, until I was 18, but it came very naturally to me when I was exposed to it. And that is despite the fact that at 18 I had this giant kippah on my head, and had previously at 18 attended a very right-wing seminary, yeshiva. That's where I graduated from. But I still, I loved biblical criticism from the first day of introduction to Bible as a college student. And that interest hasn't flagged since then. Okay, so why was I interested in this story and in this book? Well, I was interested in it because I found the characterization, the human characters in it to be interesting. Not that I didn't actually really find I can tell you my perspective as a child. My perspective has changed, become a little more nuanced. But as a child, I said, like, the God is not really interesting to me in the Hebrew Bible. It was what the people were doing. Like, that God was removed. I didn't really. It didn't really mean very much to me. What God was doing. So I couldn't relate from my childhood onwards, and it was just interesting to me how the characters navigated themselves. And there's some very, very good storytelling in the Hebrew Bible, and particularly in the 5 books of Moses and in the books of Samuel and Kings. Those are where the best stories of the Hebrew Bible are. There are good stories elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, but I found the best stories over there. And that's what drew me. It was just for similar reasons why I have read The Lord of the Rings 10 times. Meaning, it's because of the depth of the characterization, just the interaction between human beings, that really just drew me in. This is what is interesting to me. And so this led me, as a student, just to study it very, very closely. I wanted to. There were so many questions that I had never received satisfactory answers to, as a child, regarding the Hebrew Bible, and I wanted to find out the answers to those questions. I had a deep well of interest, and I was not allowed to ask many of the questions when I attended religious seminary as a teenager. So I took to it very, very avidly. And I just just sped through my program at Hebrew University. I didn't. I'm sorry for other people who have attended Hebrew University in this audience. I really loved studying at Hebrew University because of the rigor and the tech skills that I acquired there, and just very grateful in that sense. But I find the academic politics, the academic just atmosphere to be fairly toxic. So I tried to escape Hebrew University very, very fast. Meaning, I wrote my PhD in 16 months. I just wanted to get out of there. And so but that's because I had an idea about the biblical text, an idea that I'm going to tell you more about right now. It was the idea that is the kernel of the kernel of this book, and I wanted to from the time I began graduate school as an MA student, I wanted to find out what the first version of the Bible was. I always wanted to know what the first things, what it had said at first. And it's not obvious that you can that was a solvable goal to me until I actually tried to get to it. Meaning, why would I be able to get to a first version of the text? How would I be able to do it? It's just the problems seemed to be fairly insurmountable when I first contemplated. But it's the questions. Like I had an unending fountain of questions about the biblical text that had never really been answered satisfactorily, and I just wanted to know, what were the first answers? What were how did it first look like? What were the first people who wrote the Hebrew Bible thinking about? And so, I had that, I would say, in mind right from the beginning of graduate school as an MA student, and it was quite a so I had I learned philology with some of the best philologists in the world in Hebrew Bible. At that point, when I was a student at Hebrew University there was no department in the world which could hold a candle to Hebrew University's Bible department. It was absolutely the best in the world. Nobody doubted it at all. I'm not as sure as I once was about that. Like for the present Bible department, is the glory days are faded to some degree. But at the time I was there, it was just peopled by the greats of the field. And as I in the years as I finished graduate school, there were 11 retirements, 11 professors or so retired from the Bible department. To even have a Bible department after 11 professors leave that department is a bit astounding. But I really I felt very grateful. I felt very grateful to be there to really have the advantage of getting the best education available. And it really, the hallmark of Hebrew University, as opposed to other universities in Israel, was they studied the Bible critically. They studied, they are known for biblical criticism, Germanic biblical criticism, the stark biblical criticism. And this was in contrast to other schools in Israel. Another school that had a very big Bible department was Bar Ilan University, and they didn't do biblical criticism. I remember in the last year of high school, my homeroom teacher found out that I was about to go to study Bible at Hebrew University, and he had a lot of choice words to me about that choice. He told me that was the absolute worst place in the world I could study Hebrew Bible. And I translated that to mean that was the absolutely best place in the world to study Hebrew Bible, because I was never ideologically committed to, even as a teenager, to the religious seminary I was at. Anyway, that was an aside. So I really, so I studied philology, and a very certain type of a very specialized type of philology, and that's how do you take texts apart? And what do I mean by taking texts apart? It means I look at a text, I look at the repetitions in the text, I look at the different voices in the text, I look at the different styles of writing, I look at the contradictions in the text, and then I say, this part of the text was written by somebody else, and often I talk about the relative, right? This was written earlier or later than this other section of text, and that's the type of philology that I studied very carefully as a graduate student. And so, yeah, this seems all, fairly dry and everything, but it's, it's part of how I got to where I got to, meaning it's a part of this journey, and this, and it's very, I say that it's boring, and because, it's really just people just can't understand a lot of what in specialized academic for people who have had a lot of exposure to academia. When you're in a conversation, when you have these very specialized academic conversations, you're only really in conversation with a few other people in the world. Most other people, the vast majority of even academics, cannot understand your dialogue, your conversation. And that's like an ivory tower approach to knowledge, which is something that is a big part of why I'm not an academic today. It's because I just don't like that type of knowledge, that approach to knowledge. I feel that if if something is important enough, as many people as possible should know about it to the extent of their abilities. Rather than using very specialized jargon, having conversations with 5 other people. I just don't. My very humanist, progressive side said, like, what good is that doing in the world? If I can't share insights about what I learn. So that's another reason where I left very quickly from Hebrew University. But these luckily for me, these philological rules that I studied, this way of looking at text, was something that was I just was easily applicable to what I was trying to do, to finding the original version of the Hebrew Bible. And I quickly hit onto an approach that I've found to be most promising, and that was thinking of the Hebrew Bible as the composition of the Hebrew Bible as a process of accretion. And what do I mean by this? I mean that I do think, and this book, part of this book, tries to prove that there is one first version of the Hebrew Bible, and every successive authors then added to it based on their cultural context, based on where they came from, and that was done successively, generation by generation, until we get to the texts that we have today. And that is an approach. Some people have that approach to the composition of the Hebrew Bible. Many people don't. But I think it's an approach that really accords with the time and place in which the Hebrew Bible was written. So remember, we're talking about a time when, they're not that many. Here I have 1,000 books at home on my bookshelf. But printing is cheap these days and easy to do, and we can read things electronically as well. In the time of the Hebrew Bible, this just wasn't the case. It was just books, especially books that were considered to be authoritative, or books that were considered to be holy. Those were books that were treated very, very well. And so I didn't feel, I felt that intuitively that the most prevalent way of treating such a text by a successive generation would be of adding to it, rather than editing it and taking parts out, even if you disagreed with it. And so I think that was just the process that the dominant process in the composition of the Hebrew Bible. And in the it's some people accept I'm a very pure supplementarian. That's the way we talk about it. I am an advocate of the supplementary hypothesis. Yeah, of course, Peter. I'll show some examples. Yeah, so I'm giving the theoretical background now. I'm going to I have to give this in order for things to become relevant afterwards. Okay. So how did this actually take place? And when did it take place, and who is doing it? So I believe that the first version of the Hebrew Bible was written in the 8th century before the Common Era in northern Israel. Israel was divided into two, into a southern kingdom, which is the Judean kingdom. That's where the word Jews comes from. And the northern kingdom, the much larger, more populous kingdom, the kingdom that's popularly known as the Kingdom of the 10 Tribes. And I believe that the first version of the Torah, the first version of the Hebrew Bible, was written in northern Israel in the 8th century, meaning in the 700s before the Common Era. And that's maybe a generation before the fall of that kingdom, before that kingdom was destroyed and the 10 tribes were lost to history, meaning that they no longer were an entity. And the Judeans, of course, survived and flourished much afterwards. So I believe that that's when it was written. Why it was written, that's really hard to know why it was written. But at a certain point, people, for whatever reason, like to record what was, their stories, their way of looking at the world, the stories that they find most relevant. And there's it often, in the Jewish world, it often has happened that it comes right before a very bad time, or right after a very bad time, a time of destruction, a time of upheaval. that was the impetus, for example, for the writing of the Mishnah, a rabbinic text. Much later, there was this idea that it would be lost, and so that you wanted it recorded. And so that's part of it, I think, part of what was going on, the why. But I don't have a good answer for the why. And then by who was writing it? So before you write a text, you need an audience, a book of any sort. You need an audience, and there's little, there are very few people who know how to read and write in the ancient world. But we do know that there were certain periods where reading and writing, knowledge of reading and writing became more prevalent, flourished more. And that happened right at the 8th century before the Common Era. We know this by archaeological digs. We know this by epigraphic evidence, meaning evidence on pottery, evidence of missives of letters between people. We just know that there was a prevalence. More people knew how to read and write. And so seems to be a good time for writing books about stories about where you come from, and that's what this first version of the Hebrew Bible was telling. Okay, so that's the when, and now let's talk about what it was a little. I want to leave a lot of time for questions, so I'm only going to talk here for about another 15-20 minutes. And then I'll just leave a lot of time for for questions, observations. I'll expand on points that people are interested in, etc. So I want to talk about the character of Moses. Specifically, Moses, perhaps the most famous of the human characters in the Hebrew Bible, according to a rabbinic dogma. Moses authored the Hebrew Bible while he was standing at Mount Sinai. This is still a belief that among Orthodox Jews. It's not, of course, my belief. In fact, I'm going to share with you the first words of my book on my screen. Give me a second. Here. See the first words? God didn't write the Bible. Those I say exactly where I'm coming from the very beginning. I don't hide who I am over in this. This is a book written by a humanist, by an atheist, by somebody who does not believe in the supernatural. And I want to make that clear to my audience. I don't want to mislead them. And I think that's and why is it important to state this? Let me just read the first paragraph and you'll see why it's important to state this. I suspect that this does not come as a shock to you, but I thought I should state it in case you were in doubt because it is the underlying premise of the book. Without delving into theology, every book that I know of was written by a human being, and it is a good common sense assumption that the same holds true for the Hebrew Bible. This logic. The Hebrew Bible is a special book. It's an ancient book, and it is important to many people, including me, but it was still written by fallible human beings. Okay. So that's where I come from. That's what's informing me. And so what what is this? Back to Moses. So Moses did not write the Hebrew Bible because even if you look at the reconstruction of history, which is entirely hypothetical and not connected to fact, Moses would have lived about 700 years, 600 years before the Hebrew Bible was written. So it's not. He could not have written the Hebrew Bible for many, many reasons. Some of the reasons we'll go into if you're interested, but back to Moses. So one of the lenses through which people know the character of Moses most is, at least for Jews, is the Passover Haggadah. Unfortunately, for those who read the traditional Passover Haggadah, not the ones we find in our humanist communities, they will not encounter Moses at all. So how are you to learn about Moses? It's as if Moses was erased. Moses is mentioned exactly once in the entire traditional Haggadah. And for the person who purportedly took the Israelites out of Egypt to be entirely absent from the retelling of the story of the Exodus from Egypt is pretty remarkable. And so, what happened to Moses? And if you seek to learn about Moses from the Haggadah, you are sorely disappointed. You cannot learn about Moses from the Haggadah. Moses is entirely absent from the Haggadah. But why did that happen? Why was Moses why is Moses entirely absent from the Haggadah? Well, he was replaced by someone in the story of the Exodus. He was replaced by God. God is the central character of the Passover Haggadah. God's role in the Exodus is magnified and extolled. Instead of 10 plagues, there are 50 plagues, there are 250 plagues. So just his power is magnified. His part in the story is entirely, is just made into the central aspect of the story. And so wow, so that's that's not even what it says in the in the Hebrew Bible, which I already said. The main character of the Hebrew Bible is God, but that's not what you don't see that in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, Moses is present. Moses is the main human character of the story of the Exodus. So how did we arrive from point A to point B? What we see is this process of making God into the central character of the Hebrew Bible was a process that actually began in the Hebrew Bible itself. It's not something that was taken to an extreme in the Haggadah before it had precursors. This idea that God is a central character of the Exodus is a biblical idea. And so the first version of the Hebrew Bible had Moses as its central character, and God didn't appear in it very often. God appointed Moses as his emissary to Pharaoh, but after that, God doesn't reappear until Mount Sinai. He's not the one who performs the plagues. Moses performs the plagues. He's not the one who splits the sea. Moses splits the sea. He's not the one who leads the Israelites into the desert. Moses leads the Israelites into the desert. He is not the one who fights against the Amalekites. It's Moses who does this. It's Moses. Moses does everything. But one of the in popular culture, if we look at how Moses is portrayed as a stutterer, as somebody who is unsure of himself, as somebody who is very humble and not pushing himself forward, unassuming, and that marks the start of this process. It's diminishing Moses, and one of the first ways that he's diminished is making him into somebody afraid, somebody who is a stutterer, somebody who is reluctant to lead, somebody who's not a good leader, not adept at talking to people, and always tries to avoid any aspect of leadership. And that was introduced by a second author, by an author who did not like the centrality of Moses, wanted to say God is the main character of the Exodus. I want to magnify my God. My God is special to me. I want God to be the central character. So he didn't really take anything away, but he buries Moses. He buries that vision of Moses by adding lots of other stories which diminish him. And that is how a lot of how characters changed in the Hebrew Bible. That's a lot of that process begins right within the Hebrew Bible. And you can tease out that process, and that's what a lot of what I did as a philologist. I wanted to give you that example of how of Moses, because it's I would say Moses is the truly remarkable example. Moses, in the first version of the Hebrew Bible, is a a go-getter, somebody who is doesn't take no for an answer, a charismatic leader, leads the Israelites right into the promised land and gets to the promised land, wins all the wars that he is part of in Canaan. It's not Joshua. Moses doesn't die in the desert, an old and broken person. He leads the Israelites into the promised land and wins those wars as well in the promised land. And so, it's remarkable how that vision of Moses shifted entirely. And so, with regard to the humanism, Moses is the character that shifted most dramatically in this respect. Moses, the most important, the most charismatic, the most important of the Jewish leaders, as told in the Hebrew Bible, he is replaced by this idea that humans can't accomplish these great things, and God is at the root of all the important parts of history. Anyway, so I'm going to talk. This is the first in a series of talks, and so more of an introduction about about where this book comes from and such. So I'm not going to the title is a very shocking title. The title is why Abraham murdered Isaac, the first stories of the Bible revealed. Why Abraham murdered Isaac is an idea that I've been developing for more than 20 years. It's a very interesting point in the Hebrew Bible. It's not one I want to focus on today. You're gonna have to wait for a subsequent lecture to find out why Abraham murdered Isaac. I wanted to talk specifically about other aspects of the Hebrew Bible, but just to tease you a little, I'm going to read just a little portion of the introduction over here. Give me a second. Let me bring it up. Okay. Here. Just so you understand, how some of the stories, if you're familiar with the stories in the Hebrew Bible, how they were transformed a little. I'm going to share the screen, and you'll find out. Okay. So here, this is from the introduction. So these are not the first words of the book. The first words of the book, God didn't write the Bible. I wanted to start off with a bang. This is the introduction. And this is, you can see it in the book description as well. There used to be a story in the Bible in which Abraham killed his son Isaac. It is not there anymore. Neither are many other stories that were once told. In the original Bible, Jacob was the first patriarch. The Israelites were not slaves in Egypt. There were only 7 commandments, no other laws, and Moses made it to the promised land instead of dying in the desert. So this book tells these stories. It also explains how and why the Bible changed so radically into what we have today. Let me tell you a little bit about how I came to write it. That's my introduction. And so a lot of things, I wanted to show you specifically about how a human character was transformed from charismatic to being a impotent stutterer, and that's the most remarkable change in a human character in the Hebrew Bible. But there are a lot of things that are very, very different about this first version, and this book explores what was different. And so before I move on to hopefully a long Q&A, I just want to share with you again, that was the first, the introduction. I want to share with you the last sentences of the book, my conclusion, just so you see where I'm coming from. Now, I just want to say it was a happy coincidence to me that I discovered that the first version of the Hebrew Bible was a more humanist version. Meaning, I didn't expect that it would. I didn't expect this. I didn't go in thinking that would be that would be the conclusion that I would reach. I was used the tools. Hopefully, I used them very responsibly as a philologist to go ahead and I took the text apart very carefully. So for me, it's a happy coincidence that this actually was a more human focused, more human centric version of the work, which I may have hoped for. And you could say that that informed part of my search. But I would argue back that probably not. At that point in my life, when I first came up with these ideas, I wasn't thinking about in those lines yet. I was not. I wouldn't have seen myself as a humanist when I was 24. So let me read the first few lines. Thank you. I saw a question. How do you prove this? Well, that's what you'd have to go ahead and buy the book to find out. Meaning, I can't, I can't really share about how I proved what the first version was, in a few-minute talk over here without making a lot of assumptions and making a lot of people bored. I can just talk about in general about the types of tools that I use and such. Okay, let me read from the conclusion over here, and then I will open it up to a Q&A. Okay. Okay. 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to read the final 2 paragraphs over here. Okay. Give me a second. Let me share. Okay. Here, this is a paragraph. So it is somewhat ironic to me that this book actually began as part of a mourning process for Isaac. Remember, in the first version of the Hebrew Bible, in the version that we have, Isaac is not killed. Isaac survives, and he's part of the genealogy that leads to Jacob and to the rest of Israel. And so part of the mystery of this book is why Abraham murdered Isaac is part of the big innovation. Because the voyage of uncovering what the text has said, once said, quickly transformed into an immensely enjoyable experience. Isaac's death had symbolized for me the brokenness of the biblical text. As I picked up the pieces and puzzled out the first and original account, I felt like an Indiana Jones type philologist solving an ancient mystery. For a free thinker like me, the centrality of human initiative in this original Bible spoke to me in a fundamental way. The characters in the first story do horrible things, such as killing children, but also awesome things, such as fighting angels and taking the Israelites out of Egypt, all without God looking over their shoulders. I came to appreciate not only the original Bible, but also the first editor's literary genius, how he took one-sided characters and made them more complex. As when he showed that Jacob, the hero who could lift a 1-ton boulder over his head, was also a knave who stole as much as he could and left others with a bill. Without the first editor's intervention, I don't think I would have fallen in love with this aggravating but intensely beautiful text. I hope I have imparted this love and revealed to you these first tales of ancient heroes and their courageous deeds, a story that uplifts humanity as capable of great and terrible things. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. And now that was basically what I wanted to introduce you to over here. And I'm going to open up the story. I'm going to open up to Q&A. First, I'm going to address some of the questions that we have in chat, and then we will open it up to a Q&A in a oral format. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to. I have questions over here. Okay. Let's see from the start. Okay. Let's see. Okay. What is your what is your proof that there was a first version? Yes, go buy the book is not an acceptable answer. I'm sorry that it's not an acceptable answer. It's not something I can prove to you in the context of this kind of talk. It's I can only give examples in this kind of talk and only talk in general. It's a long enough book that it's difficult to give a recap of all the arguments therein. So I apologize that you find the answer unacceptable, but that I can't really provide a better one. I only can give examples. If you have a specific question about how do you prove something specific, that's something that I can do. Okay. You said that you were arguing philologically about the origins of the Bible and located in the beginnings in the 8th century BCE. What does this mean? What does that mean when we know that certain passages, such as the flood story, which reproduces the story from the Epic of Gilgamesh, date back another 1500 years or so? Certainly the Hebrew Bible draws on previous texts. There was a lot of, for certain stories, the stories of the creation, the story of the flood. There are the Epic of Gilgamesh is a great example of a text, of the flood, a story of the flood that has a lot in common with the story that we find in the Hebrew Bible. So what of it? Yes, the Hebrew Bible, just like most ancient literature, had precursors, had what it depended upon. The reasons for dating the Hebrew Bible to the 8th century just means that that's when the culture of ancient Israel was mature enough to put something in writing. Okay. Okay, according to your understanding of the development of the written Torah, are there J, E, and P and redactors involved as well? So thank you, Chuck. Yes, I use that nomenclature. I didn't use it in the context of this lecture, but I would, if we want to be more academic about it, I feel that the first version of the Hebrew Bible was E, Elohistic, meaning a version of the Bible that used the name Elohim for God, and the first editor was J, the author who first used the name Adonai, the Tetragrammaton, as his name for the Hebrew Bible. And I do believe in other authors as well. Why did I go to a religious seminary as a teenager? Well, that's not very exciting. My parents sent me there by gunpoint because they kicked me and my brother out of the house. So my parents are professors of rabbinics, and they felt that I would get a good rabbinics education and the discipline, especially my brother needed in the context of a religious seminary. Boy, were they wrong, but that's how I got there. Not happily. It's a time in my life that, for the most part, I'd rather forget. Okay. Elevator pitch. Okay. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by elevator pitch, Peter. I'm here. This is a talk about the book, so I'm not really engaged in an elevator pitch. But I would say that my elevator pitch is the first sentences of my introduction, meaning when I talked about when I said give me a second, let me bring it up again. There used to be a story in the Bible in which Abraham killed his son Isaac. It's not there anymore. Neither are many of the other stories that were once told. That is my, those a couple paragraphs, that description is my elevator pitch. It talks about why somebody should be interested in the book. Okay, let's see. The original model of the development, as I recall, was additions only, no deletions. This model has deletions. No, John. There were people who I'm not the first person who thought that this is the way to look at the development of biblical text. It's a way of looking at the development of biblical text that dates to the 19th century, fairly early in the 19th century, actually. But I wasn't the first to think that the deletions were uncommon. I might have taken it to a bit of an extreme. I don't think that there were many deletions at all, at least not advertently. Okay. Yes, there will be a hard copy in addition to the Kindle. This is just the launch. The official launch is on March 9th.